Hey there, readers, writers, and friends. Story Serpent here, and today we're talking about Nettle and Bone by Kingfisher. It's an adult fantasy that was published in April of 2022 by Tor, which is a Macmillan imprint. It's old, I know. It was embroiled in awards controversy, I know. But one of my besties told me I absolutely had to read it, and when I did, I realized I would totally recommend this book for the YA audience. But before we get into all of that, today's random words are like, share, subscribe, longitudinal. I borrowed this from my aforementioned bestie, and I'm going to give it back. What? I'm going to give it back. I'm going to give it back! Anyway, what does this book have to say about itself? Mara never wanted to be a hero. As the shy, convent-raised third-born daughter, she escaped the traditional fate of princesses, to be married away for the sake of an uncaring throne. But her sister wasn't so fortunate, and after years of silence, Mara is done watching her suffer at the hands of a powerful and abusive prince. Seeking help for her rescue mission, Mara is offered the tools she needs, but only if she can complete 3 seemingly impossible tasks. Build a dog of bones, sew a cloak of nettles, capture moonlight in a jar. But as is the way in tales of princes and witches, doing the impossible is only the beginning. Hero or not, and now joined by a disgraced ex-knight, a reluctant fairy godmother, and an enigmatic grave witch and her foul familiar, Mara might finally have the courage to save her sister and topple a throne. Okay, so the story promises we are being made is that this is absolutely a fantasy with that old school fairy tale vibe. It's definitely a little dark as we're talking about bones and grave witches. It also kind of promises that there's gonna be a fair sprinkling of feminism throughout, and that's true. We'll get to it. And honestly, I would normally consider the whole, Mara escaped the traditional fate of princesses to be married off. Maybe that's a red flag. But when we get into it, you'll see it's not as bad as it tries to make itself sound. It also does a slightly cliche thing, which is that, our prince is the bad guy. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between a trope and a cliche, and it's all in the execution. If something's done in a way that is eye-rolling, and we've seen this before, and yawn, it's a cliche. If it serves the story well and behaves archetypally, that's a trope, and it's not the worst thing ever. So, what we know from the outer trappings, we have this lovely matte dust jacket, really beautiful kind of photo-real representation of the nettle cloak that we were promised. The inner cover, hardback, gold embossed. I love this bright green. It's absolutely gorgeous. And in terms of the interior, we have these green end pages and kind of a subtle illustration on the title page. And other than that, it's just fairly straightforward, decent quality. I am very hard on books, and when I give it back, it's still going to be in excellent condition, so that's a good sign. What is going well? Believe it or not, this is an adult fantasy with 0 graphic sex. 0. I was astonished. Moreover, this little sucker, she ain't big, right? Not a lot of pages. She's a tiny little thing, which means the writing is super tight. It is clean. There are no wasted words, no endless descriptions to slog through, which means the average teen reader will probably crank through this about as fast as I did. It took me 2 sittings of maybe 3-4 hours. And I think it was so enjoyable that when I was done, I was satisfied and a little sad. Like, I wanted another. So in terms of the prose, it's spot on, done so well. And by way of example of this tight prose, check out this first sentence. The trees were full of crows, and the woods were full of madmen. Right? Why are we in a forest full of crazy people? Okay, this is gonna be a little dark. We've got black crows in the trees. We've got a forest full of madmen. This is going to be fun. And it might be the length. It might just be the amazing copy editing, but I didn't catch a single typo. So good on you, T. Kingfisher. In terms of the story, this story has a fantastic arc. And where our action starts at the beginning is woven in with flashback in a really artfully done way. Flashbacks are tricky. They can bog down a story. They can make it feel like your story didn't quite start in the right place. But we are dropped into the middle of this very, gothic kind of scene. And we get right into the action of what is happening. And then the way the flashbacks that are leading us up to this moment are woven in, they are done so expertly, and they themselves are executed so well that we don't mind. And that's tough to do. We also knew from the blurb that this was going to be a women-centric story, and those can get tedious really, really quickly. But what this story amounts to is a woman who wants to save her sister, and saving our sisters is a fantastic women-centric thing, especially when it's executed well, and it's not done in a way that's hokey, and it's not done in a way that denies the need for men and women to work together. And this story absolutely pulls that off so good. In terms of our main character, Mara, she is strong and courageous in ways that are often underappreciated, especially by society today. Stepping into a world your skills aren't equal to is an act of courage, and those that do it every day often go overlooked. Passages like this show us the kind of strength and resilience Mara has. Finally, she stared at the mass of smoke and thought, I am doing a heroic task, and heroic tasks are not done by half measures. It's only pain. Kanya's pain is so much worse than mine. And she plunged her left hand into the mass of smoke and nettles and began to spin. That realization that pain is only pain, it's an illusion, and if we push through it, we can accomplish extraordinary things, especially when we're motivated by love. And when our motivations are pure, when we're doing things for the sake of others, not for the sake of ourselves, we can accomplish the extraordinary. It's a wonderful lesson for teens, and they're not even gonna know they're learning it because the prose is so choice. That bit about it being smoke and thought, the writing here is so crisp that your teen is just going to be charmed. They're just going to love this story, and they're not going to understand that they are learning to appreciate a particular kind of strength, the kind of strength that is shown more often by women. As far as our other cast of characters, I love the Dustwife, aka the Grave Witch. She is a delight. I love a cantankerous old person in my stories, and she does not disappoint. She is curmudgeonly. She clearly knows so much more than she's ever telling, and she is so old. We've got no clue how old this woman is, but she has held on to life for the sake of her magic and taking care of the responsibilities that she has been charged with. And her role in this story is just one delightful fairy tale trope after the next. She even makes this wisecrack about not wanting to end up dancing in iron shoes because fairy tales are not kind to old women. It's so great. Our errant knight, who comes along for the ride later on, ends up being a really stunning example of how a strong man who makes right choices can still get sucker punched by the world and still be on the wrong side of politics and policy despite having done what was right and good. And in the end, we see him working through the consequences of those choices, trying to cope with the way he's been traumatized, but also doing so with honor and with strength. And believe me, having just read a different series where our male protagonist doesn't get the satisfaction of offing the bad guy in the end, watching this knight come out sword swinging, so satisfying. Moreover, our ruling women make mistakes. They have to make terrible, no-win choices for the good of their kingdoms, themselves, their families, and they screw it up. And Mara screws things up. And the Dust Wife screws things up every now and again. It's wonderful to see female characters modeled as human beings. They're making choices, and not all of those choices are good. We are not saddled with these two perfect women that don't have to change at all, and therefore the story never satisfies because there's no arc there. Mara especially makes a lot of mistakes along the way, and in fact laments the fact that she wishes more heroic tales showed you the mistakes, showed you the arduous, tedious, month-long moments that more often in modern media get condensed down to a training montage. This is the stuff that young people need. They need to understand that life is hard. You're gonna screw it up. And that's okay as long as you get back up, keep going. The world building here is spectacular. I don't know how Kingfisher does it, and I know that's, a pen name, but we'll call her Kingfisher for now. She hones in on just the right details that help fill out and paint the world without having to do endless description. We have a real embodied sense of where we are all the time, and that is really difficult to do, but she does it so well. So props to Kingfisher and props to her editors. Okay, we got to talk about what's not working. There is exactly one prose issue I have, and that is the jump rope rhyme. Jump rope rhymes either have to be waltz paced, down, up, down, up, down, up, 3 with the downbeat, or it's got to be an 8 count. That way, when the person comes leaping into, that's the point of a rope rhyme, is to create that beat, to create that pace, so that when the person jumps in, they're not tripped up by the rope, they've got a better sense of the rhythm, they're coming in at the right time. Her jump rope rhyme is offbeat. It's not an 8 count, nor does it have a good 1, 2, 3 downbeat. I don't know what kind of jump roping this woman was doing as a kid, but I imagine she fell down a lot if these are the rhymes that she's doing. Okay, in terms of the story, you remember our hook is that there were madmen in the woods. Believe it or not, the setup to that story question goes totally unanswered. And honey, it's leaving you the ability to do an in-world sequel, not necessarily with Mara, but with other characters. Go back to the Blistered Lands. Help us understand why and how they came into being, and maybe if there's a possibility of that curse being reversed, because let me tell you, ending this story without knowing what the heck was going on with the Blistered Lands had me aching. Get back to it, girl. Okay, remember how men and women need each other? Well, our knight errant does get his very satisfying bad guy violence moment at the end. They set us up all along for this romance that is very real. It's very lived in. It's not, your typical romance. There's tropes. No, it's not that. But there is that through line. And we don't even get a good kiss at the end. Again, totally unsatisfying. If you're gonna set it up, you gotta deliver on it. And while I appreciate the way she pulled it off, I'm not a huge fan of being set up for a romance and give me a kiss. Come on, deliver on the promise you made. If I have a problem with Mara as a main character, because she has been convent raised, but because she was also a princess to begin with. This girl is a little spoiled, but she works her way through it. She's a little whiny. She gets past most of that by the end. But let me tell you, she dumb. She does not recognize truth in front of her more often than not. She often makes really silly mistakes, and she seems confused by things that to me as a reader were pretty obvious. And when we're talking about an adult novel, if the adult in the book is dumber than you, the reader, that gets annoying really, really fast. Remember our reluctant fairy godmother from the back cover copy? Yeah, of course she's not affected by whatever magic is affecting Mara. She's fairy godmother. She's not fully mortal, but Mara seems very confused by this, which maybe that's supposed to be another effect of the magic, but at the time, having dealt with a few of these like silly mistakes from Mara along the way, I was just kind of annoyed at that point. Like, come on, girl, smarten up, shape up, fly right. Now let's talk themes. Remember, we had a few red flags in that back cover copy where, oh, this is going to be very female-centric. Is it going to be the kind of man-hating female-centric that just gets boring and eye-rolling? Not totally, but also kinda. Well, Mara does have a revelation about 2/3 of the way through the book that not all men are terrible, and I have found this guy here to prove it. Every other dude we encounter is some way awful. Or at least they're painted that way, even though their choices make sense. As Mara comes emerging from that forest full of madmen, she's confronted by a farmer who's like, no, I just saw you walk out of the crazy woods, get back in there or I'm hitting you with this shovel. Now, he has very good reason for that, having lived on the borders of these lands, and knows that the people who tend to come out of that woods are insane and cannibalistic. If that's your experience with these woods, the fact that this woman comes wandering out means she's a danger, and doing her in with the shovel in your hand is the best thing you can do for yourself and your community, and yet he is painted as being crazy himself. He's painted as not being reasonable. Mara's the one who is unreasonable in that situation because she doesn't expect him to act in the self-interest of himself and his community. It's harsh. It sucks that she's on the receiving end of it, but it's not that guy's fault, and it doesn't make him a bad person. Our prince is, like I said, he's very archetypical. Evil prince does bad things. But at the same time, most of his actions don't quite seem reasonable. I'm wondering if we're dealing with a kind of madness. His father, the king, is totally dementia-ridden and has good days and bad days. Maybe he's present, maybe he's not. Sometimes he says something helpful. Most of the time he's got no clue where he was. Joe Biden on a bicycle. Anyway, Mara's own father is basically absentee. Her mother is running the kingdom while he is present and kind. He's also very distracted. He seems to busy himself with certain aspects of running the kingdom, but nothing really strong. And in the end, she decides he's not a bad guy, but he's painted as so weak, I would characterize him as one. So I wish we had more examples aside from our great knight who really did embody the behavior of good men in the world. You also have to put up with a fair bit of wealth bad. Wealthy people are terrible for all the reasons. And at the same time, Mara's sister Kanya, who ends up being queen, she seems to have a very grounded sense of reality, and that might be because of the abuse that she suffered, but she also seems very aware of her people, as does Mara's mother. Despite being queen of her own kingdom, the choices she made, though not great, were done in the service of her people, and the fact that her people needed to be safe, they needed to continue to farm, they needed to feed themselves, all of those concerns, she was very aware of them. And yet, we continue to get these whole, yeah, but rich people are the worst. I appreciate that there's a dichotomy there, but I wish we could dial back that messaging. Rich people do more good in the world via charity, via job provision, than anyone else. Is greed bad? Yeah, greed is bad, but you can be poor and greedy. Those things are not mutually exclusive, and the having of wealth is not by itself an indication of greed. Overall, The Story Serpent gives this book, right here, a best beach read. It's fun, it's quick, it's got just enough dark in the flavoring that your angsty teen is gonna love it. In fact, I am probably gonna pick up a paperback copy because I'm gonna give this one back. That way my teens can read it and tear it to pieces as they always do. Anyway, If you have a story you'd like to see the serpent take on, feel free to put it below in the comments. That's all we've got for today. Till we meet again, read on, write on, and stay sharp.